In 1963, Jewish Judge Arthur Klein of the New York Supreme Court ruled that the book Fanny Hill, Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, was not obscene. This was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Fanny Hill was purely pornographic, without any pretense of artistic merit or redeeming social value. Author John Cleland first published the book in London in 1748, and made it intentionally pornographic, so he could make money to get out of debtor's prison. The book features stories about lesbianism, female masturbation, homosexuality between two young boys, women whipping men, and other abhorrent acts. The ultra-liberal Warren Court concurred with the Jew Arthur Klein, and the book was declared not obscene. Lady Chatterley's Lover, Tropic of Cancer, and Fanny Hill were all defended by Jewish lawyer Charles Rembar. In his book, The End of Obscenity, he wrote that the Fanny Hill decision produced the cry, painful or joyful, as the case might be, "The lid is off." He also wrote, "It cannot be stressed too often that it was the United States Constitution that saved these books, and not the will of the people." Jewish activist Leo Pfeffer would write in his book God, Caesar, and the Constitution that all that could be hoped to be censored now was the hardest of hardcore. But even that would be unleashed by the end of the 60s. The floodgates had been opened. These court decisions did not happen in a vacuum. They ran concurrently to the also largely Jewish-driven sexual and cultural revolutions taking place throughout America. The single most important figure in the sexualization of the West was the Jew, Sigmund Freud. He would develop theories of psychoanalysis and start the psychoanalytic movement in Vienna. By 1906, all 17 members of Freud's early psychoanalytic circle, the Psychological Wednesday Society, were Jewish, giving psychoanalysis the well-earned reputation of being a Jewish science. Freud believed that all Gentiles, no matter how much they hid it, were anti-Semites. He saw himself at war with the Gentile world, comparing himself to the Semitic general Hannibal against Rome. Without any real evidence, Freud claimed that humans are sexual from birth, that they all want to have sex with their parents, and that sexual repression of children leads to mental illness later in life. In 1908, Freud wrote an article in the first journal dedicated to sexology. This journal was founded by Jewish homosexual Magnus Hirschfeld. Hirschfeld would co-found the first sexology clinic with Iwan Bloch and Albert Eulenberg in 1913, called the Medical Society for Sexology and Eugenics. Hirschfeld grew dissatisfied with the society's direction and founded the Institute of Sexual Science in 1919. He invented the term transsexualism, and the institute would perform the first sex change operation in history. Hirschfeld lobbied the German government for 30 years to overturn a law criminalizing sodomy. Hitler referred to Hirschfeld as the most dangerous Jew in Germany. Hirschfeld would self-exile when Hitler came to power, and his institute was raided by National Socialist students who burned his book library. Five years later, in the United States, the Gentile Alfred Kinsey would open the Kinsey Institute. Kinsey was a sadomasochistic, homosexual psychopath.
Hello, I'm Dr. Alfred Kinsey from Indiana University, and I'm making a study of sex behavior. I've learned that the gap between what we assume people do sexually and what they actually do is enormous.
In 1948, he published a book entitled Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. The book was a collection of data from alleged interviews of subjects' sexual histories, using a questionnaire largely based on one Hirschfeld had used. The book was a runaway hit due to the outrageous claims it made. Kinsey said that 50% of men cheated on their wives, 69% had used prostitutes, and that between 67 to 97% had premarital sex. He also claimed that more than 1 in 3 males had a homosexual experience, and 50% of farm boys had sex with animals.
one of his key researchers, described the fact that Kinsey actually threw out 75% of the people he interviewed. It's as though you had an election, throw out 75% of your votes, and then the 25% win.
Kinsey wrote that Freud and the psychoanalysts had few specific data to prove that infants are sexual. He and his team would set out to prove this claim. Numerous children were molested, and one of the conclusions that Kinsey drew was that in an uninhibited society, boys could reach climax by the time they were 3 or 4 years of age.
Kinsey's successor as director of the Kinsey Institute, Paul Gebhardt, revealed that Alfred Kinsey was interested in having sex with men, children, and animals. One of Kinsey's most damaging and outrageous claims was that children were sexual from birth.
Alfred Kinsey took away my innocence that I didn't even know I had.
Kinsey was a hands-on scientist. There was nothing that he would have accepted in his book unless he had participated in it, seen it, done it for himself.
According to the Kinsey Institute's own figures, between 317 and 2,035 children were used in these types of sexual experiments.
He was a perverted man, deeply perverted. He may even have died of wounds that were self-inflicted during his own sexual activity because he was into self-mutilation and pain. He was a sadomasochistic homosexual.
Jewish anti-obscenity law activists and sex reformers would capitalize on Kinsey's work. Morris Ernst, Kinsey's lawyer from the ACLU, wrote a book with another Jew, David Goldstein Loth, called American Sexual Behavior and the Kinsey Report. They advocate for the repeal of the 52 existing sex crime laws, since Kinsey's data supposedly proved that 95% of males and 80% of females would be guilty of these laws. Herbert Wexler, a Jew who served on the judges' panel at Nuremberg, was the director of the American Law Institute. In 1955, he would be the chief reporter in drafting the Model Penal Code, citing Kinsey's data. This code called for the reduction in punishment or complete abolition of all sex-based laws, such as those against sodomy, homosexuality, oral sex, prostitution, adultery, and bestiality. This would be adopted in full or in part by every state over the next 2 decades.
In the areas of sex crimes, the law of the American Law Institute reflected the Kinsey studies and ultimately was enacted into state law.
Former Senator to California, Assemblyman Ray Haynes, says Kinsey's influence on the culture has caused irreparable damage to victims of sexual crimes.
In Frankfurt, Germany, a group of Marxist Jews founded the Institute for Social Research in 1923. They would be forced out of Germany 10 years later, when Hitler came to power, and would relocate to Columbia University in New York. This group would become known as the Frankfurt School. They would develop what is known as critical theory, an overt Jewish intellectual assault to tear down, criticize, and reconstruct Western culture and civilization by arguing how it is racist, misogynist, anti-Semitic, and homophobic. They would frequently claim that sexual repression was the root of many of the world's problems. The most influential book by the school was titled Dialectic of Enlightenment, written by the Jews Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer. The book portrays anti-Semitism as a mental illness in Gentiles, and that civilization itself is repressive and evil. The book harkens back to sexuality's better, pre-patriarchal past, before civilization, capitalism, and Christianity led to sexual repression and inequality. Another influential work was The Authoritarian Personality, funded by the American Jewish Committee. The book prominently featured what is known as the F scale, to measure people's fascistic tendencies. Anyone who displayed concern with sexual morality, distrust towards Jews, or traditional views on gender roles would receive a high rating on the F scale and portrayed as mentally ill. They would make the claim that this illness arises from sexual repression, closeted homosexuality, and a strict upbringing. They claim these individuals are just projecting their insecurities onto weaker people to make themselves feel better. These writings infected the social sciences of many universities and shaped the 1960s counterculture led politically by the New Left. While only 2% of the US population, Jews were vastly overrepresented among New Left radicals and intellectuals. Jewish professor Ernest van den Haag wrote in his 1969 book, The Jewish Mystique. Although very few Jews are radicals, very many radicals are Jews. Out of 100 Jews, 5 may be radicals, but out of 10 radicals, 5 are likely to be Jewish. The Students for a Democratic Society was the premier New Left group, with 100,000 members and 400 chapters at its peak in 1968. Scholars estimate over 60% of the leadership was Jewish, but other studies conducted at the universities of California and Michigan put the number much higher to between 80 and 90%. The Jew Mark Rudd was the president of the Columbia University chapter of the SDS.
This system is going to be overthrown. It's going to mean a fight. And it's going to mean a lot of white people risking a lot of things when they finally join on the side of the black people and the people of Vietnam and around the world who have already begun the fight.
This group would splinter into the more violent revolutionary group, known as the Weathermen, who got their name from a lyric by Jewish artist Bob Dylan. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows.
We wanted to become communist cadre, completely committed to the revolution.
The group had strict rules against monogamy.
Well, first of all, there was smash monogamy. You know about that. Didn't have monogamous relationships.
And would participate in group orgies.
It was a moment of extreme sexual experimentation. Group sex, homosexuality, casual sex hookups were all tried as we attempted to break out of the repression of the past into the revolutionary future.
Herbert Marcuse, a Frankfurt School Jew, was nicknamed the father of the New Left. During leftist riots in 1968 France, students carried banners with the slogan, Marx, Mao, Marcuse. Marcuse would synthesize Freudian psychoanalysis with Marxism, theorizing a future sexual utopia. Freud himself believed that suppression of sexuality was necessary in order for civilization to exist. Marcuse disagreed, believing that civilization reached a level of comfort and affluence and could return to polymorphous perversity, which is a Freud theory that children are sexual from birth and receive erotic pleasure from all parts of their body, until at age 5 this becomes centralized on their genitals. The sexual utopia of Marcuse would be a reactivation of all erotogenic zones, and consequently, in a resurgence of pregenital polyamorous sexuality, and this would make the body in its entirety an instrument of pleasure. The New Left would use the conflict of Vietnam to push counterculture views on sex. The motto of the day was, "Make love not war," a phrase invented by the Jew Gershon Legman, who was once an assistant to Alfred Kinsey. Feminist professor Linda Williams wrote in the book Sex Scene, "When we chanted 'Make love not war,' my draft-resisting friends and I were echoing the words of Frankfurt School theorists. And also, my generation really did think, at least for a moment, that making love could be a political act against war." Another radical left-wing group were the Youth International Party, or Yippies, the political manifestation of the hippie movement. The group was co-founded by the Jew Jerry Rubin, who wrote a book called Do It that was widely distributed among college campuses. In the chapter titled F*** God, Rubin writes, "The naked human body is immoral under Christianity and illegal under American law. When we start playing with our private parts, our parents say, 'Don't do that.' The mother commits a crime against her child when she says, 'Don't do that.' We are taught body pleasure is immoral. We're really taught to hate ourselves. Our tactic is to send niggers and long-hair scum invading white middle-class homes, on the living room floor, crashing on the chandeliers, spewing sperm on the Jesus pictures, breaking the furniture, and smashing Sunday school napalm blood America forever." The introduction of the book was written by Black Panther icon Eldridge Cleaver, who admitted to raping white women in his book, Soul on Ice. He wrote, "Rape was an insurrectionary act. It delighted me that I was defying and trampling upon the white man's law, upon his system of values, and that I was defiling his women. I felt I was getting revenge." From the site of the act of rape, consternation spread outwardly in concentric circles.